What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another video. And today we're going to be going deep. We're going to be taking a deep dive into one of the most popular decks in the Pioneer format this time around. If you have not seen one of these videos before, and I've only really done one other one, and coincidentally it was on a other Izzet deck in the modern format, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the Blue-Red Phoenix deck, getting some tips, tricks, ins and outs if you're looking at picking up the deck, or maybe some things that you might not have known when playing the deck, and things that will kind of help you boost your win rate playing with said deck. And that's kind of what the series has been all about. It's been used as like a teaching tool to get players to either kind of like why they should play the certain deck, or things like that. So anyway, without that rambling out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at Blue-Red Phoenix and let's learn something today. So here we have the Izzet Phoenix deck. Is actually second place in the Pioneer Preliminary on November 8th. Went undefeated, 4-0, second place. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but undefeated nonetheless in a Pioneer format where we remember like Mono White Humans is a deck that people play, the Mono Green Devotion decks, and like Black Red mid-range are decks that people are playing. So in theory, to me, a lot of like this deck's bad matchups are going to be like nut draws in the green deck for most people, like black red mid range if they have a draw heavy on like Kalidas and the Graveyard Trespasser. Mono white could be a little bit difficult. The thing is, for like some of those decks too, like the aggro decks, just kind of like fold the thing in the ice, because you are able to just kind of play this on turn 2 and then like on turn 4 pretty reliably like flip this card because of all of your really cheap spells. And kind of the way that you want to approach some of those matchups, obviously like against like control and against some of the other like mid-range decks, and especially like black-red mid-range that can mess with your graveyard pretty easily in game ones and stuff. You want to just have a turn where like you don't necessarily expose your Arclight Phoenixes for too long in the graveyard. Pieces of the Puzzle is like your best friend when setting up your graveyard, because you just get to reveal 5 cards. Chances are you're going to get 2 cards off of it and the rest go in your graveyard. Really, you're looking for Arclight Phoenix being the big one because it's your biggest payoff for playing the deck and why you play so many cheap cantrippy type spells in your deck. So you want to be able to do that. You also want to, if you're like on a Ledger Shredder plan, you want to sometimes kind of debate on playing this on like turn 2 or turn 3. The argument for playing it on turn 3 is getting to put a counter on it, and normally you could kind of do that playing around cards like opposing like Fiery Impulses or like other 3 damage burn spells that would actually kill the Ledger Shredder, that you can just cast like another spell to save it from actually getting burned down. On top of that, like getting to play it on later turns as well gives you obviously more mana, more chances to hit your land drops, and cast other spells in conjunction with the Ledger Shredder. Even like potentially following up a Ledger Shredder with another Ledger Shredder, putting a counter on the original one, and so on. Really, what you're trying to get out of this as well is to use all your mana on every turn, and every deck wants to do that, but this deck in particular wants to do it because we have 2 pretty amazing delve spells in the deck. Treasure Cruise and Temporal Trespass really kind of give you a lot of just like home run potential. So you have turns where like you can get back like 2 Arclight Phoenixes, let's say, and like you have a Ledger Shredder. So you hit your opponent for 8, that's a chunk of damage, and then you just cast like Galvanic Iteration and a Temporal Trespass. You're taking 2 extra turns and you have 8 flying power in play, and short of your opponent playing just a ton of like Cavalier Thorns and things like that, they're not going to be able to beat it, and tagging for 8 and then getting to take 2 extra turns and then hitting them for another 16 over the course of 2 turns, if not more, obviously just win you the game usually is enough to win you the game. So definitely keeping in mind that like Treasure Cruise a lot of the time is a 1 mana spell, Temporal Trespass is a 3 mana spell, and just getting to leverage like Galvanic Iterations on like Treasure Cruise being like your best friend. In fact, the 3 mana to draw 6 cards, essentially like sorcery speed, is pretty dang good in my opinion. And you really don't run into any issues with like having a graveyard full of cards to cast Treasure Cruise, but you have to exile Arclight Phoenix to cast Treasure Cruise. With cards like Consider and then the aforementioned like pieces of the puzzle. Chart, of course, as well is able to like kind of put cards in your graveyard. Lightning Axe can be your best friend, and kind of like 2-for-1ing your opponent in a different way, where really you discarding a card is like putting a Phoenix in the bin and getting ran by like a threatening creature. Definitely also works well against like Graveyard Trespasser in a weird way, where like maybe they eat something, but then you're able to like axe discard a Phoenix and then like discard another card for the ward, but then like get rid of it and you still accomplish like getting a Phoenix in your graveyard. Some of the other cantrips like Opt and stuff like that. Fiery Impulse is just a super efficient burn spell that only goes to the creature, but that's really all you need because you're just worried about like the other aggressive matchups where you have hands that you kind of want to set up, where you want to just play like a Consider and then go into like maybe a Charter Course, or playing like a Ledger Shredder / Thing in the Ice, and then following it up with like a Pieces of the Puzzle to really start going off on turn 4. Definitely when you have the time, this deck can go pretty quick. You can have turns where you just bring back Arclight Phoenix on turn 3, or you just have turns where like you set up and like turn 4 or turn 5 you could be returning multiple Phoenixes and attacking with like a 3 or 4 power Ledger Shredder. The deck is very capable of doing that, and while some matchups like will almost require that you take that kind of aggressive slant to the deck, you are also able to kind of go with like the slower decks. You end up building up a ton of mana and just getting to cast like multiple spells and overload your opponent's like counter spells and things like that. Even to the point where like Arclight Phoenix is also just a super resilient threat, where if your opponent say Wraths like with Supreme Verdict, you're able to just cast a bunch of cantrips because a lot of your other cards just cantrip, i.e. like Treasure Cruise, Consider, and Charter Course, and Pieces of the Puzzle and things like that. You're able to get enough cards back in your hand to where you're able to just like Consider, Opt, and then like Charter Course or something like that. Potentially find like another Phoenix and then just be able to get back 2 or 3 Phoenixes and put the pressure back on your opponent to have another sweeper, to which again you've cast all these other cantrips. You more than likely have probably sculpted up a hand that can keep returning Phoenixes. So definitely any non-exile based removal is hard for any deck to handle, and really like short of like the black-red deck in the game 1s and stuff, other decks really don't have like any good tech for like the graveyard decks, which is kind of why like the Abzan and Greasefang decks are really good, is because opponents really have a hard time handling on turn handling in games 1, but then like having some options game 2 and game 3, and you have some options as well in game 2 and game 3 as well. Gaining cards like Young Pyromancer, Brazen Borrower, Saheeli is like another like Young Pyromancer type effect, instead of making servos, instead of making elementals. You also have like Crackling Drake as well, to where if your opponent does bring in like Graveyard Hate, like they do bring in like Rest in Pieces and things like that, you have a threat that still has a high power that can kill your opponent like just in 1 or 2 turns. Also getting to draw you a card is very nice as well. The mana also like can support like a double blue, double red spell, just from all the various duels that get to come into play untapped that this deck plays. An interesting piece of tech on the sideboard is Vance's Blasting Cannons. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, you exile a top card of your library. If it's not a land card, you can cast it this turn. Essentially, it's kind of a way that like you can essentially guarantee to like draw at least 1 spell between this and like your draw step. You have to be very unlucky, especially playing 19 lands, and 2 of your lands, going up to 21, 2 of your lands are spells themselves. When you flip Spitfire Bastion or Vance's Blasting Cannons to Spitfire Bastion, you have essentially a way to like win the game, slash also control the board, as being like a 4 mana like deal 3 damage to a creature or player. So this eventually gives you some inevitability. This is definitely, if you're playing a lot slower, like I'd advise playing this like against the control decks, like they end up sleeping the board, and then you just follow it up with like Vance's Blasting Cannons, making it a lot easier to return Arclight Phoenixes or get like Ledger Shredders and things like that going. But on top of that, also putting your opponent on having, you know, some sort of land-based destruction, whether it's like Field of Ruin and things like that, to deal with the Spitfire Bastion, which of course still leaves you kind of ahead on mana in a sense. Obviously pretty big for them to be able to get rid of it, but if they don't, they're in some serious trouble. The rest of the type of cards are kind of, you know, expected. You know, you have like your other Mystical Disputes for like your other like control decks. You have Sweltering Sun for the creature matchups, where if you draw this maybe after Casting a Sweltering Sun if your opponent just has like a really slow draw, you can cycle this and cash it in for a card. Braids, you know, getting to pull double duty against some of the artifact-based decks, like the Abzan Greasefang, and also being able to kill Greasefang as well, along with some of the other, you know, various like mono red, Atarka red, or mono white matchups. Aether Gust being pretty big game against the like mono green decks. Sometimes like this and like Disdainful Stroke just give you enough to like give you a turn to where you just put a bunch of pressure on your opponent, and even unless they like go infinite with Karn Key or Restorative Burst, usually enough to like win you the game. You know, again, you attack for like 8-9 points of damage in the air and just tempo your opponent out by like countering their spell essentially with like Aether Gust or Disdainful Stroke. It's makes it very difficult because they already have to have like an onboard Cavalier to really stop you. And if you're attacking with, you know, two Phoenixes and a countered Ledger Shredder, putting your opponent to like 4 really puts them in a precarious situation, because they're dealing with like 4 flyers, and any 2 of them in any combination are lethal. On top of, if they kill Phoenix now, there's a good chance that they get to come back on the next turn anyway. So that's really like the Izzet Phoenix deck. A lot of it seems like you know, pretty self-explanatory. You definitely don't want to just blow like your cantrips on like nothing. You know, you kind of like consider as a card that, you know, you have an idea of like what you want to hit when you look at the top card. Like when you really surveil that card, you want it to be an Arclight Phoenix so you can just bin it. But like the card selection from Consider and Opt can be very, very good, and always just have in mind something that you're looking for. Essentially, like these early turns could just be sculpting a hand that can get back a ton of Arclight Phoenixes, or setting up like a Ledger Shredder or like a Thing in the Ice. I would probably mulligan pretty aggressively, either having a hand that is like absolutely full of cantrips, like 2, maybe 3 lands, and it has like some number of Considers and Ops, and maybe like a Treasure Cruise or something like that. Just for the fact that you aren't going to win the game unless you have threats, and you would basically have like 5 of them that you want to draw and 4 that you want to be able to put in your graveyard. So definitely mulliganing rather aggressively for at least a Ledger Shredder or a Thing in the Ice, unless you have a Phoenix and a way to like discard it and stuff. That's fine too, because those cantrips as well could just find more Phoenixes to put into the bin, and of course casting all of those as well get back Arclight Phoenixes and can really put a hurting on your opponent. It's definitely being patient as well. You know, definitely as you play the deck, learning when to go for it and when to pull the trigger on trying to cast a bunch of spells, because this deck can also be really brutal if you attempt to go for it and, you know, you make a miscalculation and you end up missing. Again, that is like super brutal, and definitely more times than not where you cast 2 spells and you don't find anything, you're just sitting on all lands, you are forever from getting to cast like Arclight Phoenixes. And short of like a Treasure Cruise, there's not really a single card, short of Treasure Cruise and Pieces of the Puzzle, to really like help you get back in the game, get back Phoenixes, start flipping a Thing in the Ice, or even like putting counters on Ledger Shredder and things of that nature. And yeah, that's the deck. That is Izzet Phoenix. Deck is seeing a lot more play now in the last like week or 2 than it has before. I still think the deck is very powerful. You know, it's one of the draws to playing the deck, that it has this chance of just kind of like going off, bringing back 2 or 3 birds on like turn 3, you know, with like an extremely like nutty draw, you know, like Consider to discard 1, Charter Course to discard 1, and then, you know, getting to cast some number of like Considers and things like that to then eventually bring back all these Phoenixes. But nonetheless, like it's easy to get like at least 2 Phoenixes in the graveyard, bring them back and hit your opponent for 6 every turn, starting on like turn 3 or turn 4, depending on how much time you actually get to set up. So definitely something to keep in mind. A deck that's fun to play, a deck that I played on the channel. So if you're interested in kind of seeing the deck go off and some of the like pretty good matches that I've had with the deck, I do have those videos somewhere on my channel, like probably within like the last few months. But yeah, definitely something worth to watch and kind of get a feel for what you want to do when playing the deck. So that's going to do it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you can see more videos like this. I also like to do deck techs for Modern and Pioneer, as well as trying to get in some other decks and some more stuff planned out really for starting like next week and all that. So on that note as well, there is a link in the description for the Discord server, so go ahead and follow that link in the description to the Discord server, so that way you can join that, talk about Magic and all that fun stuff. That's going to do it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next one.